Thank you for the invitation. I wish I could be with you, but I hope that you find this presentation interesting. I'm thankful to the previous speakers because mine builds on their presentation. I have been part of GynoCare as in the working group that deals, working group 3, dealing with legal and regulatory affairs. So I am actually presenting the preliminary results, this is first time actually, about one of our virtual mobility grants. And see if I can move my slide. Yes, so very briefly, an introduction about consent, informed consent. So I'll keep it short because you've heard a lot about it. And then we will run through our grant and the questionnaire that we produced to distribute among our European friends to find out more information about what they are including in their informed consent forms and information sheets. The aim was to try to get harmonization to facilitate collaboration in research. And I have been choosy in what results I'm going to talk about because obviously there's a lot more work to be done on the analysis. So yes, informed consent in biobanking specifically. What is so special? Informed consent, as we've heard, is the backbone of all research, of all medical care. But what's special about biobanking is that we are collecting for the future. Unknown future research projects, possible new technologies. And this makes the need for informed consent much more relevant, and it emphasizes the responsibility that the research team has. So very briefly, because you've heard about these, well, some of these, Declaration of Helsinki, informed consent was first sort of put over to all the researchers as far back as 1964. But biobanks were only mentioned in 2013. That's in the 2013 version. And in fact, biobanks are also highlighted in the Declaration of Taipei, where again, it specifically says that consent can only be valid if there is specific information provided. The CHOMs we've heard about, here they do speak at length about consent, but, and they do mention, I'm passing some information about biobank governance. More relevant from the regulatory aspect is the Council of Europe's recommendation, which is specific to biobanking. It has nothing to do with other types of biomedical research. And here they do go at great length, giving guidelines, which information should be made available. And I'll show you one slide, 2 slides actually about this. But the information not only given to the individuals prior to they're able to take a decision to consent to submit a sample to the bank, but also that there should be regular information about the governance of the biobank provided to the general public in terms of annual reports. So here is one slide on the Declaration of Taipei. This summarizes what information they think should be in your communication with potential participants. So I'm sure you've heard all about this, and we will be mentioning some of these points, not all of them. I'm not going to say too much about legal rights. Our questionnaire did have a section on legal rights, but I will just briefly say something about GDPR and data protection safeguards. The next 2 slides tell us the information that is found on the recommendation by the Council of Europe. I've expanded a bit on the information to the public, the scope of the bank, your procedures for collecting, storing, using the samples, including consent. And then people who are responsible for collection. If you look at this box down here, that it does not address data according to GDPR rules. So here we're talking about sample matters rather than data matters. I'll come back to that in a minute. There should also be feedback on research results and generally information how to access materials from the bank. So they suggest that there should be an annual report by the biobank available on a website, for example. Then they go on to discuss in more detail the information that should be given to a potential participant prior to them making a decision. And this information must be comprehensible, understandable, as precise as possible. And obviously, this is a bit of a difficult issue for biobanking because, as I've already hinted, we are often unaware of what the future is going to hold. So there is a need to update these guidelines that the biobank, or the policies that the biobank has, on a regular basis. Another issue which this recommendation points is how much to disclose. And they actually address this and they say what a reasonable person would want to know, but depends on the participant. And this is the crucial phrase, because that means the researcher has a responsibility to try and engage the participant to find out what's important to them. This implies time and effort to actually facilitate participation. And maybe this communication issue needs to be addressed more often. And as we've heard from the previous speaker, ethics has to be thought of when you're writing your protocols at the beginning. So all this, you have to be considering the time and the funding that's needed to spend time to discuss issues with potential participants. And of course, you have to be available to answer any questions, not just at the enrollment stage, but also throughout the study, or rather throughout the banking time in this case. Okay, one slide about data protection. I'll come back to this in the results. So yes, the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, has made it compulsory that you inform the participants of all the rights that they have according to GDPR. Basically, the right to access, rectify, or erase their data, portability of data, that they can request information, they can lodge complaints, but they can also obviously withdraw consent. There are other important issues which the GDPR addresses and which should also be passed on to the potential participant about access to the material in the bank, the time, the storage details and the length of time they are stored for, who has accessed the material, what is the purpose of this data collection, and also details on who is responsible for the processing. Okay, so I come to the actual cost section where we decided there are two working groups. Working group 2 is on biobanking and working group 3 is on legal and regulatory issues. And we joined forces here with the working group 3 leading. So there are 3 of us on this group. Malta, that's myself, Greece, Dr. Olga Tsartsazu, who is a lawyer, and she is actually the lead for this group. And we were joined by a bioethicist, Sarah, from Italy. But also with us are the team from Ireland and their own working group too. And the people from public health also from Malta, which are in the next slide. So I've put all the names. The objectives for this was to actually try and harmonize patient information sheets and consent forms across Europe at all order. Because as you shall see from the preliminary results, we are far from harmonized. So this is the team in detail, all the people involved. I hope I haven't left anybody out, because over time, people do move around. And this is a summary of the questionnaire. Some of you have seen this when I first presented it in this conference first held in Malta. I am not going to talk about all these because we don't have time, and also we're still in the early stages of analysis of the results. But I'm going to concentrate on information sheet informed consent form. This questionnaire was sent out twice, and unfortunately, I have to say we were very unhappy with how it was received, because we got very poor response the first time. We had to send it out again. Eventually, we got 30 replies for our questionnaire. However, as you shall see from this slide, we only have 8 countries represented because we had 23 replies from 23 different biobanks in Spain. So obviously, this is going to skew our analysis, as you've heard Prof. Scalea say earlier, because it's a small sample. And in fact, nowhere have I tried to put percentages, because we are, as you can see, it's not very representative of the European research field. Because this is a gynecological tumor action, we did ask them whether they collect gyne tumors. Before I move on, as you can see, most of these are all public biobanks, so there was no response from a private biobank, but it's a mixture of university academic biobanks, research, and healthcare biobanks. So this slide is a reply to our question on, do you collect gynecological tumors? So 21 biobanks did, and out of these, about 15 had a general collection of gyne tumors, with only one biobank actually having 4 separate collections for benign, borderline, malignant, and rare. But that's as far as we took it with regards to gyne tumors. All the rest of the replies, actually, I just took all the responses together. They are not related to questions on gyne. So let's look at the informed consent. We did ask them, do you use one form? Do you use 2 forms, one information, one consent? Do you use a general one or a specific one? And as you can see, the majority of respondents said that they have a general informed consent form for a collection of samples. But some biobanks have a specific form according to the study they're doing, and in 2 biobanks said they routinely use both. This slide actually shows now who is the physical person who actually provides the informed sheet and the informed consent form to the patient. I should have said participant there. I was being biased by thinking of gyne tumors, but it should be participant really. So as you can see, it's biased very much towards the clinicians, again, possibly reflecting the fact that we were targeting banks that had gyne tumors. But they have, some of these biobanks have actually utilized other members of the principal investigator, PI, biobank reps, and hospital reps. Some banks receive specimens from health institutions. So obviously they couldn't be specific, but they would say that our samples come from different healthcare situations which employ, maybe some of them employ a nurse, some of them employ a clinician to actually obtain samples. The question, the first box up here shows the question asked specifically for who is responsible, but we always give them an option to other where they can write in something else. An important question, which I've just put down at the bottom there, do you provide training for the individuals, for these individuals? And the majority said yes here, and no, but it's almost equal numbers because of the small numbers. So this is an important issue. And it's important actually for all people who sit on ethics committees as well, that very few people receive specific training and they sort of learn on the job and then have the experience and the expertise to talk about their experiences. And I think it's time we thought about doing something more specific on training people in obtaining consent in an ethical way. And in fact, we did ask who was the person who actually obtains the consent, not just gives out the form. And the box shows the question, give us the methods of obtaining informed consent. And as you can see, again, it's clinician mostly, but there is a more widespread distribution. However, only one biobank said that they have a network, and only one, I think, 1 or 2 mentioned online, that they accepted consent online. This would be through a computer program, not just by telephone or something like that. Although there was 1 or 2 people who did actually say they would receive consent, would speak to the person online. I'm not sure exactly on telephone, excuse me, how this would work. 11 of these biobanks had separate forms for information and for consent, and 19 had a combined form. Only 4 of the biobanks actually used some form of digital program, we've heard, yes, people do like paper, and even in our biobank, we still use paper, but we're using paper and also have an online program. So I'm not saying much about consent, but to remind ourselves the different types of consent that there can be, we did ask what type of consent they use, and we had 25 respondents who said they use broad consent, out of which 9 said that they specifically limit the consent to secondary use for studies with the same disease of the patient. 15 said they would get broad consent for any study for any disease, while about 5 said they also have specific exceptions in their broad consent. But the 3 biobanks actually provide tiered consent, and one biobank has dynamic consent, while another biobank is considering this. And to remind ourselves what these type of consents are, here we are. Traditionally, biobanking has used the broad consent model. This was slowly sort of going out of fashion, and people were encouraged to use staged, layered, or tiered consent, where you see the participants at different stages, offering them more information each time. Ideally, one should have dynamic consent, and this is becoming easier because it's if you have an IT program, because it can be done all online. And in the IT program, there can be live information, if you like, of what's happening to their sample, what they can track their samples, they can find out what research studies the biobank is involved in, and they also have the option to withdraw their consent often on these online programs. However, as you say, this is not yet commonly available. And in fact, recent publications coming from the Netherlands and coming also from Switzerland quite recently are moving again towards pushing for broad consent with changes, with recognition by research ethics committees. Maybe this is following the change that has happened in the US with the changes in the federal laws, where they actually recognized broad consent, provided certain types of information are given to the participants. Don't want to say more about this, but obviously when we come to write up our results, we would have to think about this. Consent withdrawal. Yes, everybody, practically everybody acknowledges that there is the right to withdraw consent. That is, we had 30 answers, and also 28 said, yes, we do tell them they have a right to withdraw their consent. This is obviously obligatory now with data protection, but it raises the issue. You ask them to withdraw their consent. In biobank, the sample alone is insufficient, so the samples are always associated with data. But very few countries actually have separate entirely legislation and regulation for samples from legislation for data. Yes, we do have legislation for data, but often, because this gets lost among the information that we have about the samples. Do you ask if participants allow the biobank to use their processed sample and or data in the future? And only half of the biobanks, only half of these people actually say that they do ask them if they give permission to processing their samples and or data. And obviously this goes against the grain in terms of GDPR. Consent withdrawal. So how is it actually done? So 15 answered that the participant or patient has to inform the biobank by email. 14 said that there should be a formal written request. Now, some of these are actually multiple answers. So a biobank can say, yes, they can send an email, but they need to send a formal request. Again, when we come to the final analysis, we have to be a bit more clear. But because the numbers are small, it was going to be difficult for me to actually analyze them fast. I had to do this very fast. We have 3 people who are using an online platform to actually receive a request for consent withdrawal. These are the various other options that people have mentioned. Patients contacts, TTP of University Hospital. This is from Germany, and I'm sorry, but I need to find out what TTP is. It has some sort of data the repository of healthcare. Some people have what's called a revocation sheet. So they have a specific sheet on which you have to fill in to establish that you really want to withdraw your consent. Continuing on consent withdrawal, what is the policy of the biobank? What does the policy do on receiving a request? So 18 say that they write back to the patient either by email or written, we haven't asked how, to confirm, to let them know that yes, their withdrawal is confirmed. And then they would destroy the samples together with the data. But 8 biobanks only said they would destroy the samples. And this worries me because what is happening to the data? It's difficult for me to analyze because we didn't actually ask them whether they just have samples alone, but it seems unlikely because, as I said, they're having samples alone doesn't make sense in a biobank. So maybe this is a flaw with our question. Again, according to GDPR, they have to erase the data and the linkage codes, and only 15 said they do. In fact, everybody should say this. This is a legal requirement in Europe. Okay, that was consent. And I move on to governance. We asked them, what do they say about the bank? So 27 say that they do tell them what is the purpose, the scope of the biobank. 22 say they explain what type of research they generally do. They give the contact details of the biobank. They give the contact details of the data protection officer. Again, this is a legal requirement for countries that have to follow the GDPR. So again, 24, it should be all the people there. It should be 30 there. Contact details of person obtaining informed consent. This is still a bit, there's no agreement whether this should be done or not, because in most cases, I suppose, it's not known who is going to give who is actually going to sign the informed consent sheet at the time. More information. So do you tell them that if they withdraw their consent, the medical management will not be affected? And 29 people said yes, and 1 did not reply. I said not relevant, sorry. We did have one biobank, which was part of a blood and tissue institution, but they do some banking. Benefits. So most benefits and risks have been addressed. What worries me is that there is less worry about IT risks from data security. So that's featured low on, we should start to think about this when we address risks. Are our data protection safeguards robust enough for us not to worry that there are risks? The benefits, we've been hearing about clinical trials, but I see that that scored very low potential for participating in future clinical trials. That may lead to access to drugs. Only 6 biobanks actually say that, although they do tell them there would be new therapies. Storage. This is the most difficult slide to assess. I've separated samples and data, but as I said, these really go together. And in fact, the answers are not uniform. As you can see, they should be uniform. There should be, if there are 12 samples saying yes, there should be 12 biobanks saying yes to sample information. There should be 12 saying yes to the associated data. So, and so we do inform them, yes, that samples are being stored and where they are being stored and how secure they are. But 18 do not do that. And 19 do not say anything about storage of data. Again, this is against GDPR rules. We then ask them then the time for storage. Now, when you consider the no 19 there, you can see why there are small numbers in the time. True enough, some biobanks said this is not relevant to them because they're collecting post-mortem material, or that was only one biobank, however. Very interestingly, let's look at the samples. There are a multitude of terms used, which are not the same. I've tried to separate them. So no limit, forever, till consent withdrawal, 5. Indefinite, till sample is exhausted, 10. Undefined, till the bank closes, 6. Are we talking about the same thing? I don't know. 4 biobanks actually had a time limit set, over 10 years. Some of them said 30 years straight out. There was a tissue bank which said 30 years. Then there was another bank which is currently 10 years, but they are considering moving to an indefinite. So it is really variable. And again, this is where harmonization is least apparent. If you look at the data, again, this is all over the place. This doesn't mean that the 5 here are the same 5 there. In fact, there is a lot of crossover. So we will try and analyze this in a bit more detail, but again, the numbers are very small. We ask them then if information is provided to the participants about what the samples that they are being collected can be used for. Is it a non-profit research, commercial purposes? And we then mentioned generation of primary cells, tumor cell lines, and we left people to suggest or write what else they tell them. So on the whole, most of these banks were actually doing non-profit research, although 9 of them did say that they had they would be involved in commercial purposes. We got 2 biobanks that said they would inform the participants that they were doing research in organoids, and others had a much more generic approach. They just said, we do biomedical research projects. That's not very precise or comprehensible. We did then ask, do you tell them that who are you going to share the information with? Obviously, biobanks always share, but who with? So 18 say that they do have the possibility of sharing in the same country. 14 share with EU research partners, 20 with international, 8 with commercial partners. Then we had somebody say that we would share with regulatory, sorry, this was a question. Only 8 said they would share with regulatory bodies if required by law. Obviously, this has to be everybody. If the national legislation asks you to share, then you have to. Well, and the other thing, if a court of law asks you to share, then by law you have to share. That should be in your consent form. You have to inform people about it. We asked about if you're sharing, you need an access committee. We asked the banks if they had an access committee. 17 said yes, 9 said no. Two biobanks said, this is the role of our research ethics committee. They have this responsibility. 1 said, it's the responsibility of the ethics committee and the external scientific committee. And 1 said, it's the biomed manager and the clinical team. Again, this is a bit worrying. Recontact. Well, we have seen that it was broad consent, so obviously there are going to be very few people who are actually going to opt for recontact with samples that there are. Not surprising then that 18 answered, we will only recontact if there are new samples. But still, even with the broad consent generally available for most, there were still substantial numbers who would actually inform them that ask them if they want to be recontacted if there's a future study. And then we have contact for reconsent. So 10 answered that they would only ask for new consent if the research scope has changed, and this is quite correct ethically and legally. And obviously children are reaching legal maturity, only 5 answered, but this could be because they were not collecting pediatric material. In fact, we did have a specific question on pediatric material, and as you can see, 18 said this is not applicable. So we're talking about only 22 banks that do pediatric research, and this is their answer to whom they would give research information about research results and incidental findings. So return of results to adults now. Do you inform the patient participants if research results will be returned? Only 13. Now, the current practice is to actually return individual research results, not only if they are clinically actionable, but more and more the public and participants want results. Obviously, this involves genetic counseling, mostly genetic, because a lot of this work at biobanks is genomics. And it seems that some biobanks still have to think about this. Some tell them how they return the results, some tell them who will return them, but again, 13 said this is not applicable to our biobank. I don't know why that is so, because I suppose maybe they are not doing the research themselves and the results are not in their hands. And because of my colleagues in registries, I had to include this. So we did ask, is the data you have in the biobank linked to anything else? So 27 said it's linked to medical records. Only 5 said it's linked to national registries. And 1 said it's linked to a national statistics office. Obviously, this will have to change with the European Health Data space in the future. And I know it's not relevant on this, but I put it here to prevent having an extra slide. We asked them if they tell them that they're about financial compensation, and 13 said no, and 17 said we indicate that there is no financial gain. I'll finish off by saying something about data. So questions about privacy and confidentiality. Do you explain the difference between anonymization and pseudonymization? This is very important. Do you state that anonymized data will be only anonymized data will be used for publication? Do you tell them that aggregated anonymized data can be used in a catalog or directory? The answers here are quite low. And these are, looks like the same question, but this was actually saying, with regards to safeguards for data protection, do you talk about anonymization? Do you talk about pseudonymization? Do you mention secure information technology IT systems? Do you mention data protection officer? And obviously, with the GDPR in mind, all these have to be mentioned. So this is actually an answer that they have looked at the legislation. So this is the last result. And we try to see whether lay people are being involved in communication when ICFs are being produced. Only 4 biobanks said they had involved lay people, and only 4 involved patient organizations, which is a shame, really, because they have a lot to offer. So conclusion, we need to finalize the results and try them up. This is a very preliminary analysis. We have limitations, poor response, only 8 countries. We're not very clear what the difference is between all these biobanks. But surely there is no harmonization. And we had hoped that we could harmonize to enhance collaboration. Well, 2 major issues. The storage problem is a problem for everybody, at length of time of storage. There seems to be no agreement about what to call it and the timing. And research ethics committees in different countries expect different policies. And obviously, we are not really collaborating fully with the data protection regulation. We have actually included other legal questions, which I haven't put in this presentation. And I did talk about prot consent is still the first choice, even where no biobank legislation exists to protect them. And we might actually be hearing more in the literature about this. That's me. Sorry for taking a bit longer. I can stop sharing, but I can answer any questions if you have any.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Dr. Britget. Thank you, Dr. Britget Ellul. Very comprehensive, and we'll definitely have this paper published. It's one of the deliverables of our cross-section, particular working group 3. Now I would like to open the floor for any questions, both to you and to our previous 2 speakers.